Welcome back to the Sanctum Secorum podcast, where we plumb the depths of Appendix N as it pertains to the Dungeon Crawl Classics role-playing game. We're back from our summer hiatus, and we're here to help you serve these literary offerings at your DCC RPG table. I am Keeper Jen. With me tonight are my two most wonderful co-hosts ever. We have Keeper Bob.
Hey, everybody.
And we have Keeper Mark.
Good evening.
And I guess we are missing Keeper Dave because, we're returning to one of his favorite places. Tonight we're going to be discussing Elric's next adventures, Torn Through the Outer Dimensions. Bob, take it away.
Well, it's the sailor on the seas of fate, and this triad of tales begins with sailing to the future. Elric is lost somewhere in the Young Kingdoms and near the sea. A mysterious ship appears, and he's welcomed aboard by its captain and introduced to three other powerful warriors. The captain informs the adventurers that they are traveling across time and between realities. They have been chosen because they alone have the power to stop alien sorcerers from destroying their worlds. In sailing to the present, Elric finds himself on another shore without the memory of his last adventure. He meets a sailor called Count Smjorgen Baldhead. Smjorgen Baldhead. Yeah, that's unfortunate. And who accompanies Elric as they're followed by a mysterious riderless horse. Elric and Smjorgen find that they are in another world, one inhabited by a Melnibonéan nobleman named Saxif Da'an. Saxif recognizes Elric, but does not honor his sovereignty in this realm. And Saxif himself is subject of an old Melnibonéan legend. Finally, in sailing to the past, Elric and Smjorgen, after passing through the Crimson Gate, are saved from drowning by Duke Avon and his men. Duke Avon is traveling to find Rilin Kryn the ancestral city of the Melnibonéans, where he seeks two rare gems purported to be the eyes of a large jade statue of Ariok. Elric and Smjorgen decide to join him on the voyage.
Well,
Moorcock tongue twisters. That's the way to start the evening. Yeah.
I mean,
it rolls off the tongue.
We nailed down Melnibonéan finally, but Smjorgen, oof. And then Agak and Kagak and yeah. Oh, okay, so we pick up when Elric has it all, right?
Well, right. I mean, this is
girl. He's got the rich island kingdom, and he decides he's a little too emo to stick around, and so he leaves it all behind in search of inner peace.
Right. So yeah. So we actually pick up after he has walked away from it all, which is that's kind of a Michael Moorcock thing, right? I mean, he describes himself as an anarchist. So in a lot of his stories, there's all these powerful gods and rulers, and at the end his hero is always choosing to find his own way regardless, which is Michael Moorcock sort of thing. Find your own way, everyone else just get out of my way. And I mean, this falls after the events of the Fortress of the Black Pearl, but that was published in, I want to say 89, and I think this was published in like 76.
Yeah, it was 76.
So, as we learned with his last release, he's perfectly happy inserting stories in, especially since really the Elric story has a pretty hard ending to it. When you get to the end, it ends.
And if you recall from our interview with him, he doesn't go back and reread what he's already written. He doesn't worry so much about the consistencies.
Well, but he still remains fairly consistent, though. But like he doesn't.
When's the first time the Eternal Champions actually meet? Was it book 1, book 3, book 2?
Well, that rather depends. But if you notice, I mean, four of them meet in the first story here. which Elric doesn't remember once that adventure is done. And of course, Corum is like, well, we have all met, three of us have met before, we three who are one, and nobody remembers that but Corum. So he's got little things like that he can draw upon, so that in continuity doesn't become an issue for the big crossovers like that.
Yeah,
like, come on, a four-way Eternal Champion team up.
Yeah, this is very much like a side quest, because it is inserted, into this timeline after the main, events, essentially that,
Yeah.
like you said, Bob, it has a very much a beginning and an end. That was published in the early 60s. And since then, it's been a lot of like, let's insert what is Elric doing the month after, when I didn't detail that out. And it's great to have the conceit of, oh, he doesn't remember it, right? As a kind of like a exit out of it. But it also it's very rich, in terms of like, it's expanding the mythology, especially of his race and this world, going back in the third story all the way to the roots of the ancient, people that that were driven out by the meetings of these the gods, right? Which is, I love that story. They're all three of these are really nice, but the first and the second ones I think are my favorite, definitely out of the three. So
well, and there's so many great little bits of business in the descriptions. In the first story, as they're looking at these ruined buildings, and they notice that the shadows of the buildings reveal how they looked when they were once whole. And they look, well, that one looks sort of like a machine. Well, it looks like a machine and a musical instrument, and they're kind of piecing together. So you get this idea that these ruins are of this bizarre, almost futuristic realm. And it's still not what any of them believe it to be.
Yeah. I have to say, it was such a pleasure that we had Michael Moorcock on the show, and it's been nearly a year looking back. I think it's October of last year, and to get a chance to actually properly handle one of his stories and is really rewarding. But just reflecting on that interview and how generous he was with his time, and just I really feel a much deeper connection to these stories after having done that than the first time I read them, when I was very young. I was in my teens, I think, when I first read the Elric stories. And obviously there was some published since then that I haven't caught up on yet. But this one was one I got a chance to read again, and after we had talked to Michael, it's just it just reinforces just a lot of his energy or his presence or his anarchic demeanor, or just it's all part of this. And I really appreciated that. And just folks who may not have had a chance to listen to that one or watch that one, go check it out. It's worth it, just from the rambling nature, but also just the deep nature of the conversation, I think. So
well, and if you felt close to the stories then, I don't have it scheduled yet, but we're talking right now to have him back on the show, hopefully in November or December of this year.
Oh gosh.
So
no pressure now, right?
Yeah, so
it was almost easier last time, Bob.
Now we know, Mike. It's all good.
I'm willing to go to his house and set up the he's nearby. Just I'll do it. I'll check out his wallpaper and report back.
Yes,
I want a thread count.
Bring back some swamp juice.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah.
But yeah, so
okay,
hopefully,
so getting back to the story at hand, the three different mini novellas, if you will, seem to have different tones, right? Like the first one is very dreamlike, even in the way he remembers it. The second one's a little bit more, hey, basic adventure of the week. I found the third to be exceptionally bleak.
That's fair.
Yeah. It's very much that arc of Elric of, yes, you end up hurting those who you love, the friends, come to appreciate or admire. and it's all feels meaningless, right? Kind of in his perspective, right? Not necessarily in the larger perspective, of the beings who are controlling him, but he has, I think, like, there's a quote from the end of the story where he's looking at the dead body of one of these sailors that basically was a casualty of Duke Avon's service, and he's saying he won't be remembered. They don't even bury him. And it's like that's what life is, essentially. And it is a very bleak ending. Despite the fact that he escapes with his companions, Smigorian, or Baldhead. He's got what he wants. He's got the treasure that he wants to take back to reclaim his honor. Elric doesn't care for that. Doesn't there's nothing that he can be sated by in those terms.
Well, there's definitely a bleakness to the finish of the first, right? After you have the 4 eternal champions, each with 4 companions, many of whom fall along the way. And then the rest have their flesh and bones and muscle and sinew all merged together to create this 4-in-1 being. And when they are released, most of them are just utterly broken and insane and are just left lying there crying and drooling or rocking, and there's nothing to be done. And so they're just left behind as lost. I mean, that's pretty bleak too, right? I mean, But
at least we got gore, right?
but it also, I think it also, properly plays out how mind-shattering something like that would be. A lot of times in a fantasy novel, it'd be, oh, they're merged together and now poof, they're apart and they carry on. Nope, not in an Elric story. Elric stories have consequences if you are a normal mortal being.
Yeah, we were joking before we started about how this is kind of the second horror we've had in a row. It's like a cosmic horror in this case, just because of how that turns out, for his companions and for the ones that survive.
Just wait till next month. Spoilers. No, I'm really intrigued about the fact that these seem to be 3 completely independently published novellas. Mark, did you have some notes on that one?
Well, the latter 2 stories are reworkings of 2 smaller novellas. I think the book 2 is The Lands Beyond the World, is what it was originally published as, and the 3rd one, Sailing to the Past, is a revision of The Jade Man's Eyes. So this was actually published as a book though in 1976. So I think Mr. Moorcock or Michael likes to revisit and revise stories, and when he does so in a novel form, he's taken an opportunity to sort of like make them connected, right? So obviously he's building a connection between the book 1 is kind of the original one, right? The one that's very different, from the other 2 in the scale and the scope of the events, and it's also connected to his later, or his his work that he's been doing on Eternal Champions. But the other 2 stories are things that have been published before, but this is a book that was published, by itself, just with some connection to, to the previous work that he'd done.
Well, that sort of fits with how the original Elric stories were, originally published separately in magazines, and then were wound a little more closely together when they were published in book form. And it works. He didn't have to create a bridging story, which often doesn't work. He just made some alterations, and it all flows really nicely. And
now, I did find an interesting token nerd moment here. The Jade Man's Eyes was originally printed as a chapbook that was printed in green ink. So, here's your nerd moment for the night.
All right, Christmas list.
We'll hit word nerd stuff later on with Mark, right?
Well, yeah, a preview of that is that, Michael Moorcock's not really somebody who focuses on like extreme language, right? Like in some of the authors that we've had. It's a very readable stories. These are things that they're not slow or boring, but they are engaging at a level where you don't have to like every other page look up a word, right? Which
Right.
some people don't like that style, and this is a very much a very readable form. But
it's still rich.
It's still rich, yeah. It's still very rich, and it is his description of combat and this interactions that it doesn't get old to me. It seems, despite that it's a very much a recurring theme that keeps coming up about how he has this weight on him from the doom from the sword that he carries. It's even though you can kind of foretell a lot of the ending, he makes the characters really stand out, and Elric's inner mind is what you're really feeling a part of. And so I think he does an excellent job, just in terms of course he does. I mean, so.
I mean, I'm still a fan of Corum over Elric simply because, less emo, okay?
but that is exactly what Elric is supposed to be, right? It's the angsty teen.
Yeah, he's the angsty one. Kugel's the right. I don't think there's a similar main character. I can't even call him a protagonist. I don't think there's a similar character in the genre, right? I think of the main character in so many other Appendix N stories, and so few of them are just so Stormcloud,
Well, but it's not just that, right? Elric is not the mighty Thune barbarian who hacks his way through foes. He's, his vision is bad, his body is weak. He requires elixirs, drugs,
still positive.
and the power drawn from the sword as Stormbringer is siphoning life out of things so that he can continue forward. So he really stands out, I think, as unique as a very flawed. I'm loath to call him a hero. You're right, but he's a very flawed character.
Yeah, I mean, he's a champion, a tool in service of some universe, right? That's obviously organized around pitting, solving or the never ending battle between the forces of chaos and law, and I think that is like the core element that really sort of carries or stands the test of time in some ways, because he recognizes that to a certain level, right? And I think that's where his nihilism is, his melancholy, his sort of like comes from. So
but melancholy, just
But also, when you talk about how the text never grows boring or rote, when he goes into battle and he draws Stormbringer, it's not just this crack of power and he sets to, as it's building up and the blade begins its keening song and it gets louder. There's so much descriptive depth to what is going on before it finally, before the runes burst into light. And I never grow tired of those descriptions because they're always different and they're fantastic.
That's true.
Elric is a very cinematically written character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have there ever been any like media forums?
So
I'm not familiar.
Okay, so Wendy Pini, one of the creators of ElfQuest, spent years trying to do an Elric film. There was the rights for an Elric film were eventually procured. I forget which studio had them, and then though they dropped that, they went to another studio. But I think nothing's happened with that since like 2012. The closest, if you want to see a live action Elric, the closest to official you would ever see would be in the Hawkwind concert film, The Chronicles of the Black Sword, where Michael Moorcock is there providing narration for Elric's story, and there is a performer on stage as Elric.
Interesting.
So if you can find that, and I mean, Michael Moorcock's there. He wrote some of this stuff, and so to me, that's official publishers. So that would be the only chance you have to see an official live Elric at the moment.
Okay.
Which is a shame. I mean, it's a great character, and there's so many there's been so many people over the years that would have been fantastic. David Bowie might have been a really good Elric, right?
Okay. So I'm going to bridge this back into the show and say we can't get it in film, right? But you could have it at your table.
Yes.
What would you stat to bring
true.
this story to your table?
I would start with the tubes of yellow liquid, Elric's drugs. Perhaps there's something that you could that a character could use to boost strength and stamina if they've got like a 5 or a 6 or less, right? So, and it doesn't bring them up. Yeah, it doesn't bring them up to like mighty. It doesn't give them 18s, but maybe it brings them up to average for short periods of time.
Gets rid of the negative bonus or modifier, yeah.
But with an ongoing cost. Obviously, Elric, Hawkmoon, Corum, Urikose, the Eternal Champions, especially since we have a spell, Eternal Champion, in DCC. And of course, really, if you look at the 4 of them, any of the 4 of them are closer to like the 36 plus result than say a 12 or a 14 result.
They even come with their own, red shirts, as that.
Yeah. I almost think that you could add a 40 plus result to that spell that requires prior multiple successful castings at like the 36 level, so that you could, Quorum references we 3 who are 1, and then there's the 4 who are 1. So perhaps you could add something to the spell so that you could create such an amalgam through the spell or through other means.
And 4 was the max. 4
was the maximum to safely bring together without damaging the universes. I thought that was a pretty important note as well. Agak and Gagak would be really cool as like outsider wizard patrons, because they're so alien and so different. And patrons always want something. Well, what they want. They want to slowly convert the universe into energy that they can absorb and use in warfare in their home universe.
Very much a spellburn friendly.
Yeah, exactly, right. And maybe if you spellburn more than X number of points, they keep some of it. There was something about, so there was Houn, Serpent Tamer. And I was really struck by the description of his shimmering green armor. And it doesn't seem to have any magical properties other than it is shimmering in green. But that kind of caught me as interesting. And then he's got his song where he was able to calm serpents. He really is a serpent tamer. That might be fun. How about cursed blades that players still want to use? Right? Always, it's a cursed sword. What's it do? Well, you go to attack and it stabs you or stabs your friend instead. Well, then now I just need to get rid of it. But you can't let go of it. That's generally how cursed weapons have been written in a number of systems in the past. It's kind of lame. I love the idea, where he describes his salvation and his nemesis, his great black battle blade Stormbringer. Stormbringer it's a powerful weapon, but it is a curse, and creating a subset of weapons like that where there's consequences, but they're balanced, or they're close enough balanced that in the short term you think you're going to be okay. I'd love to do something like that. There was the primitive slime beasts when they entered Gagak, and one of the things I liked about them, it really seemed, in DCC terms, it really seemed like a swarm, right? The way they flooded down and they're slashing through dozens of them as they go, but it was a swarm that didn't require area of effect actions, right? You didn't have to be casting spells. You could hit them with a sword and diminish them. And I thought that was kind of nice and different, as well as, kind of oogie, right? I mean, they had like a bone plate for teeth, and they were mostly slime.
And they had this sort of like noxious cloud that sort of like accompanied them, or that stifling in the the air around them. So
they were utterly disgusting and alien. But that's something that, because there really isn't a mechanic for slashing through multiple foes in DCC. Obviously judges discretion with like Mighty Deeds, but beyond that, there really isn't anything. So the idea that you could have a swarm, or you could treat them like a colony, like maybe a primordial ooze or primordial slime, where it's okay, well, it has this many hit points by this size, and every hit is taking down one of these things, but there's just so many of them. That level of representation for a mass combat with them, I think, has a lot of potential for DCC, because DCC is a game of moments, in my opinion. So, that's what I've got. What about you, Mark?
I was really taken by the reptilian creatures that they encounter in the third book that are trying to defend, the forest or the jungle. The Olabs, I think, is what they end up, discovering the names for. But they had these kind of cool weapons, these crystalline discs that could decapitate or slice off somebody's arm, that they would fling with clubs, sort of like launch them. But they're described very, they have these stork-like legs and these kind of short forearms and human-like features, right? I just thought those were kind of cool monsters that have, kind of a unique, weapon that's presented, and certainly overpowering, because they're resistant to even Stormbringer's power, where Elric finds that when he wounds them, it only sucks part of their essence, doesn't instantly do so, right? And even he's overwhelmed by these creatures, where perhaps 2 of them out of dozens are slain in this attack on the boat, until he summons, aid from another creature, which I also thought would be great to stat up as a patron, which is, I'll try this, of the insect folk, or of the insect folk, who would be a great patron, since he's obviously very alien, demon-like, in his allusions to, his commanding these dragonfly creatures or other insects that come in and save Elric and his companions. He'd be a great patron to write up.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds like Elric, a great patron for monsters too.
Yeah. Oh, that's that's a cool one. Where you can associate them with monstrous beings and races. Wind elementals that Elric mentions, because his people have a pact going back, through the 100 centuries that they've existed on the Dragon Isles, and then with all these kind of creatures. And he mentions the sylphs of the breeze, the Sharnas who lived in the storms, and the most powerful of all, the Harhessians, the creatures of the whirlwinds. And he calls upon them to bring the breeze and propel the boat to escape to the Crimson Gate. And of course, his sorcery is hard to work in that area, in that land. But just the idea that these elements in control, not necessarily of like a physical manifestation of them, other than the effects that they have, is kind of a cool sorceress casting and spell.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have you pronounce it again.
Yeah. Bob, I'll let you pronounce these.
Nurm of the insect phone.
During
I apologize to our listeners.
During the same battle, when they're battling Agok and Gagok, they're attacked by giant baboons,
which are terrifying.
They're terrifying.
Baboons are terrifying. Let alone giant baboons.
It's the tearing and rending, the warriors, these hardy warriors from across the centuries, and are heroes in their own right, but they can't stand against these giant baboons. And I love the menace of like a familiar animal, but that is just when it becomes enlarged, or has a totally aggressive feel to it. it feels overwhelming, and even they almost falter at this this assault. And what are giant baboons doing in
Well, and people are like having their heads. I mean, baboons are terrifying to begin with, and they're like tearing people's heads off because now they're gigantic. That was just. There are movies about about killer baboons to begin with. So that imagery just kind of set me back on my heels. I'm like, nope. I draw the line there. I'm turning back down the stairs. Elric, Hawkmoon, good to meet you guys. Good luck. I'll be back at the boat.
Yeah, you could almost sort of group it with the the giant ape has a few different variants, like the in the basic
yes
book, you could have like a subsection sort of built out on giant baboons.
Oh my god!
I love the scene when they're trying to escape from the other sorcerer, the other I can't remember his name now. You go back up to it. Saxif, and he realizes that the riderless horse is coming after him, and he says, sink the boat, sink it with lead catapults or lead shots from the catapults. And that was something that I'd never thought of, just in terms of like just get these great lumps of hard material and use it as a weapon, in this case to sink this floating menace that he saw. So I love the idea of like alternate shots or alternate types of weapons that you can load into your catapults.
I don't know, Mike. That sounds like a foreshadowing to the next tournament. Knowing you.
And the last thing I had was I really love that scene where he is having to confront Ariok, and he is given this gem with a small image of the Jade Man in it. And Ariok tells him, you can't command me. No one can command me unless you have the gem, and Elric of course has this gem, but it's only used one time. He cannot use it more than that. It's like the Ariok tells him, it is only good this once, and once it's done, you cannot command me again. And I love that it's sort of like a very limited, powerful magic object, and it's up to the players to figure out when is the right time. Do I hold on to this, or is this the key moment? It's very much in that DCC sort of convention vein of like, you could spell burn everything because you think this is the big final boss or monster that you're confronting, but what happens after that? Yep. Carrying forward, and even in that what are the consequences of using up all of your possessions or your magic in this, and because you might be right, you might be wrong. So
if ever such an item appears at a table that I'm playing, don't let me have the item. Because I'm that guy. We're like, okay, we're not going to use it now. We're going to use it later. I'll put it in the backpack, and it will be forgotten, and we'll all be dead. And so I'm like, hey, didn't we have a gem with like the Jade Man inside that we could use once? Oh man, yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. Oh.
It's that feeling of the zero level that you left all the luck on the table, for
well, like when we play tested DCC 100, I was the one that had the little device that changed everything. I'm like, yeah, no, we're not messing with this thing. I just put it in the backpack and we kept going, which really kind of served us pretty well for a lot of it.
But Bob broke it, yeah.
What about you, Jen?
Well, just to underline one of Bob's upcoming projects, pirates.
Yes.
I would love to put together something for the ship itself. Since the captain is blind, we don't have evidence of how the ship is controlled, at least nothing concrete. Or
his brother's mute. Yeah.
What's that?
And his brother is mute.
So there's obviously some sort of relationship with the ship itself. And you can't tell me that it's not sentient. I don't know if I would believe that. And I think we'll touch on that later, Bob. The runestone or the rune swords themselves would be very interesting to stat up. Like Bob mentioned, the cursed blades that players would still want to use. The DCC annual actually gives us some really cool tips to create either the patron weapons or that powerful argumentative sword. And I was looking at the facets of the Eternal Champions as those of a patron, maybe building on the three fates. We've got the multiple facets of the Eternal Champion, and you might not always be summoning the same one each time. That's kind of a small list, but I figured I would let you guys pontificate for a while, and I've got stuff coming. Don't worry.
Well,
it won't be in the audio section though.
In some ways, the Eternal Champion is almost a patron power being themselves, but not a patron. There's just slivers of them throughout the multiverses. These different facets, and they're not all aligned for one side or the other.
Which would be another argument for the patron weapon, where part of a character is actually within the weapon that you're wielding. And that's where the power of it comes from.
Yeah, not fair.
So I guess moving along, we're trying to bring this to the table. So audio recommendations might be welcome. Mine would come before the game, so go listen to the audiobook. Mark, you might have something a little more useful for setting the mood during or adjacent to a game.
The only thing I come up with is that a band I really like, Blind Guardian, has a few songs, a few albums that are inspired by Elric stories. The couple that I remembered were the ones that refer to Tanalorn, which is this city of neutrality at the center of the universe, and it's sort of talked about in the first story, as this timeless city, or it comes in many forms. There's some speculation between the champions about is this city they go to defeat the sorcerers, is it a version of Tanalorn. So they have a song called Tanalorn, which is off their At the Edge of Time album. They have another one called The Quest for Tanalorn, which is from their Somewhere Far Beyond album. And just as a plug, my favorite album, there's this one that's about Tolkien, which is Nightfall in Middle Earth. I listen to that quite a lot, especially when I'm just want something that I'm editing music or writing music, just to have in the background. So Blind Guardian, it's probably a band that folks are familiar with, but definitely check them out if you get the chance. They're really cool, and just like their music. So that's what I had. I know, Bob, you are prepared with the list.
Sailor on the Seas of Fate.
Well, first of all, I was not familiar with Blind Guardian, so hunting them down just for the Spotify list and listening to them, I greatly enjoyed them. I'm definitely going to be listening to more of their stuff because it was just a lot of fun and just good stuff. So for me, let's see. I would probably start with the band Numenor, and they have an album called Colossal Darkness, and the entire album's really good, but specifically they have two songs on there, Eternal Champion and The Sailor on the Seas of Fate, which are directly inspired by the book we read.
Who would have guessed?
Of course, Sailors on the Seas of Fate has inspired a number of songs. There's Osiris, Castles, Zagax, and Winter Tree have all done their songs inspired by the story. But if you're gonna talk Elric and music, you've got to dive into Blue Oyster Cult with things like Black Blade, and of course Hawkwind, the Chronicle of the Black Sword, Live Chronicles, which is their live version with narration by Michael Moorcock, and of course their concert movie, The Chronicles of the Black Sword, as well as I would include Warrior on the Edge of Time by Hawkwind, which also has some material written by Moorcock. That's kind of the core that I would build out from there, because there's some fantastic stuff out there, but that's where I would start, I think, for these. When we did our first Elric story in the long ago, that was episode 4 of Sanctum Secorum. Keeping track, we had a much kind of wider variety because there was a lot of atmospheric music that really sort of fit, and I didn't find as much that really fit the atmosphere, because the atmospheres for these stories were so ethereal and they were dreamlike, but they weren't, normally if I'm going like dreamlike music, I'm thinking like, like electronica and things of that nature, and it didn't feel like that sort of dreamlike.
No.
So I think,
nor does it feel like new agey.
Yeah, no. So I think we had some really solid stuff there. And again, I'd never listened to Blind Guardian. Mark recommended them, and let me tell you, having listened to them, I am behind that all the way. That was just a fantastic discovery for me today.
Do you want to add those to the Spotify playlist?
Oh, they're on the Spotify playlist.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I just didn't put the audiobooks on the Spotify playlist yet because I didn't find them on Spotify. But no, any music that we find, and that we recommend, if it's on Spotify, it goes on the Spotify list. This episode's Spotify list is shorter than some of the others. It's like maybe 3.5 hours. I know we've clocked in as many as like 11, but
yeah,
3.5 hours. It's like a 90-page book, people. I think 3 hours is good.
Yeah.
All right. Now's the time I've been waiting for. Keeper Mark's word of the day.
This one was a little bit like searching for the right thing that stood out to me. The word that I leaped at, when I first saw it on the page was "yoy," because that's where Count Smigorian is basically using that to in his battle exaltations, and it's Y-O-I. But I looked at that word and I was like, is that a misprint in my version of the book? No, but it actually turns out to be, an Old English form of yay, or, like a cry of exaltation. And I really love the first time I'd seen that word, in print or used. And I love the fact that it gives this character some background, feeling and flavor, that he's obviously a ship captain, and he's using sort of, this in a way that, that carries his personality into this battle as he's joining Elric to fend off, or to, he joins Elric to basically complete the battle that Elric started with these brigands. The other thing that he does is he insults those brigands by calling them coast huggers. And I love the combination of just like an insult that, on the face of it is just 2 words you put together, but it's so depth and meaningful, coming from a ship captain with his experience, and saying they're not real sailors, they're coast huggers. And I love that term and that phrase.
Nice turn of landlubber, yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. It's better than landlubbers. Just they're just off the edge of the land, but they can't quite extend themselves to the open waters. And
well, I love things like that. Having lived on the Gulf Coast of Florida when I was in school, we in Sarasota, we would refer to people with surfboards as ripple riders because there was no surf in Sarasota. So coast huggers and things like that. Yeah, just sort of. It's an insult, but it insults them, not in an overly harsh way linguistically, but by diminishment of
exactly. I love
what they really can accomplish.
Yeah. The last word that I wanted to call out was that a few times, Elric is in communication with Stormbringer, but it's not a sentient, communication, but it's a very querulous, feeling that he has from this, from what it's giving him. And I love that word querulous, and it's one of these things that, just as in, for me, that when I see that, it's not an uncommon word, but it's also one of those things that, it really conveys that feeling of his, his relationship with Stormbringer. So that's another one I wanted to highlight. But yeah, like I said, mostly, Michael Moorcock is making a very readable work. This is not a work that you have to feel intimidated by, as far as like having to, encounter something that you have to research or look up, but
Yeah, there's not a lexicon, right?
it's not like Scott, but it's very engaging, and there's a few things that just you spot in the text, and you're like, yoy, that's it, that's what I want to take away. Give me more yoy.
I'm going to start asking for the OED ratings on these.
Yeah, I should put those in the notes.
Are you gonna do that? Yoy or noi?
Yeah, the new segment, yoy.
Ow.
All right, should we move on to reskins and existing inspirations? And Jen, do you want to start us off with that?
We listed a couple of sources that we can use to help with stats, but you could just pick up some things that have already been written and statted out and fleshed out for you and reskin them. For instance, from Angels, Demons, and Beings Between, which was originally published, I want to say 2013-ish by Dragon's Horde Publishing, subsequently republished by Goodman Games. Wanch, father of the wave, as a patron of the sea. And I really dig some of the details that they've included for that one. Blood for the Serpent King, it really does feel to me like that third story with the lizard, the serpentine or lizard folk, and the various levels of garb that they wear, and the interaction level, like some of the cultural stigma between the different lizard folk, if you will. I said I wanted to start up that ship, and what I might just do is grab the Magic Caravan Predatbeer from DCC Dying Earth and reskin that. And then as far as traversing the different planes, there's a fun MCC story written by Mr. Brinkman, The Never When Rock. It really does take you from one place to the other. And one of my favorite little esoteric gems is within the 13th Skull, written by Mr. Goodman, in fact. There is a book that not many parties have discovered this when I run it, but depending on the page they turn to, they can be transported to a completely different plane. So if you're looking for something that can take your party from one place to the other without a big MacGuffin, if you will, here's your book.
Did I leave that book in my backpack? I remember playing that event.
Big. It was a little too big for you.
Okay.
Old dwarf. Yeah. What you got, Mark?
Mine were more inspired by that you could potentially run with. I mean, I don't know if you could lightly reskin these, but you could certainly use them as very similar, inspirations to the stories. One that I was going to call out is the DCC tournament that we did in 2018, I think, which was Riders on the Phlogiston, and it takes place over 3 different planes of existence, in effect, taking you from a very sort of MCC area to to the mountains of the Shutter Mountains, and then ultimately taking to I can't remember the basically the last area is kind of future purple planetish. And so it's very nice to have like an adventure to give you an idea of how you can contain all that within the same storyline. And I think that folks who haven't had a chance to play in the tournaments might want to just check it out from a just a inspirational standpoint, since there's so much of this multi-dimensional parts of the Elric stories. The next few that I looked at were really just more spinning off of the Jade Man in the last story. this idea of this huge edifice, what is it? And it turns out in the story, it's actually the physical manifestation of Ariok, the Chaos Lord. But there's a few stories that I really like that, idea of a statue and, of what is the origin of that. And some of them, you could reskin to be, this, a godlike, an origin. The Falcate Idol by Daniel Bishop has a mechanical creature or thing that's that's the ultimate thing you encounter, but it also has these orbs for eyes, and it made me, the eyes of the Jade Man being removed and added back in, made me think of that adventure and how you could take the concept of this being the statue with missing eyes and how you could use that in your monster creation and what happens when it puts its eyes back in. There's a DCC Dying Earth adventure that Julian wrote called The Laughing Idol of Larshan. And in that one, there, the monks of this, monastery are using it to basically, have the people of the nearby village bring them, goods and consumables, and they sell their elixirs or their drinks. But one thing the characters can do is sort of activate this, this statue at the end, and of course it could have consequences that they don't really particularly predict or enjoy. Similarly, there's the Brendan LaSalle convention module, The Accursed Heart of the World Ender, is another one of these sort of statues that turns out to be able to devastate whole worlds, potentially, when it's activated, if things go wrong. And that's a 0 level funnel if people are looking for another funnel adventure that's different from, some of the usual ones that people get brought into the system. And I like that adventure quite a lot. And it was only available as a convention module, but you can of course go to the Goodman Game Store and get a copy of it. The other ones that I thought about, obviously Intrigue at the Court of Chaos is a very Elric appropriate adventure where you have the gods and the lords of law and the gods of chaos competing over the PCs and their role in this. And so I can't recommend that adventure enough. If you are new to DCC, it's an adventure that takes you all the way from level 1 to within the same level, of course, confronting the gods themselves, and that's very much what DCC is, that you can be, like you said, Jen, transported to another dimension or plane just by reading a book, or in this case, you have to go to the Court of Chaos itself, and you're what do you do in that case, and it's very fun adventure that when I ran it for a group. A couple other ones, or one other one to shout out that I wanted to make sure I mentioned was Michael Curtis wrote Intrigue at the Court of Chaos. He also wrote a 6th level adventure called Imprisoned in the God Skull. And that adventure just made me think of Agok and his sister, the buildings that they go into and how they don't realize until the end that they are living creatures. The God Skull is, in that adventure, is a mysterious, sort of object that's been invaded by these these alien plants, and it also is imprisoning this this kind of ancient power, and it can again have these sort of like dimension changing or world shaping events that happen at the end of it, and it's also one of those rare adventures that's very high level, which there's a few examples of that, but Michael Curtis does an excellent job just conveying like sort of the scale at that level and making the menaces appropriate and consequential. And the last thing I just wanted to shout out for folks who aren't familiar with it, but Basic Role Playing or the BRP system did an excellent role-playing game called Stormbringer, based on the Elric stories. I highly recommend that just for people checking out what the setting is, for a role-playing setting, if people want some inspiration, or if they want to take that setting and use it in DCC, that's a very rich, publication, and just well worth diving into for, what it presents as far as some of the spells and the history and the characters and those things. So I think it's out of print, been out of print for a long time, and it's if you happen to go to Half Price Bookstore or one of those kind of similar bookstores and grab a copy, you should, if you find one. So
Definitely out of print. And if you go back and listen to our interview with Michael Moorcock, you'll know why.
Yeah, that's right.
But then there were, but it is those box sets. There's also one for, I know there was one for Hawkmoon.
Mhm.
So they did a couple, and those box sets.
Yeah, they did. They did.
Fabulous. Yeah, they detailed kind of the young kingdoms.
Yes. Yeah.
And they were really nicely done. And Jen, while I'm thinking about it, you bring up the flying car of Emperor Datvir. I kind of wonder if Tanalorn could almost be a stand-in for Emperor Datvir. Just especially the because we see Tanalorn in the first story, but we don't. We see echoes and cast-offs of what it might have been, as opposed to
perfect.
what it actually is. So
it is almost like a city described as it's through the ages, right? So it can take on many forms, and I think that's a good way of introducing it. So.
Yeah, I like that.
Immediately I started thinking you could take pieces from Peril on the Purple Planet with a small number of tweaks. You easily have this blue sunned world of sailing into the present. Just surrounded by water, give it kind of that weird alien feel to it. But I think my big reskin, and Jen partially inspires this, would be Sailors on the Starless Sea. Change the dragon ship, give it a new form, but then you give it a new form, new captain, and a new purpose that lasts far beyond the adventure. So you could use it to drive the campaign forward. It doesn't necessarily have to be sentient and kind of a dick, which ours was when we were playing. But you could have something like that where you move some of the missing villagers forward so they can be found, and then the party finds the ship and it's waiting for them, and it brings them aboard, and so you have this reason to go place to place and move a campaign forward. And maybe during campaign play, all right, well, these characters have kind of, these 3 of the 5 people at the table, those characters have met what they needed to do. So those players bring in new characters of equal level and keep going. So you can keep it fresh and make essentially the ship the focus of the campaign as it moves forward. It's the protagonist with the characters then handling everything, but it's the ship that knows what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
We were about 3 sessions away from finishing before the campaign came to an abrupt halt. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like that, killing.
I mean, I might re-up that, but anyway, we digress heavily. I apologize. Was there anything else on your list, Philip?
Those are kind of my keys that hadn't already been covered, but I think it's worth noticing that Sleepy Fingers has mentioned that Curse of the Kingspire really does have some Melnibonéan vibes as well. So that might be a good one to pick up for reskinning.
What I'm hearing is that I need to spend my lunch hours in the stacks in the warehouse now.
Yeah, it's not like you have a shortage of
no, just time. Okay, but speaking of gems that could be found within the stacks, that's going to bring us to our DCC feature for this show. Not in Kansas Anymore by Dieter Zimmerman. You can find this in the Goodman Games 2016 Gen Con program guide. And Bob, have fun with this. I don't think there's any weird pronunciations this time.
I don't think so. Everyone's day had been perfectly normal so far, except for the odd foreign coins they each found this morning. The day unfolded uneventfully: work, school, social activities, or whatever else people get up to during the day. But just before sunset, all of that changed. A great inexplicable explosion of sound and light robbed them of their senses. And as they recovered, the first thing they noticed prior to their sight and hearing returning was a painful, scorching heat at their backs. As their vision faded from black to red, there were voices shouting all around them. They certainly aren't in Kansas anymore.
Mm.
I love this adventure so much.
Talk about the time hopping fish out of water. I will say this is probably my favorite adventure to do character generation sessions for, because you start out as 1970s characters. So you've got the truck driver with the cigarettes, you've got the waitress with a notepad, you've got the accountant or the taxi driver or what have you. You've got the pimp, yeah.
Well, and this is, at least in my mind, it's one of two very solid 70s era adventures, right? There's this one and Beyond the Silver Scream. I don't know as there's really any others out there, but
so they're definitely third party, but
it really gives such great flavor. You can have at your table. You can have a wizard, and you can have old Jack Burton says you really could have that Big Trouble in Little China sort of moment.
Yeah, it's meant as a funnel, but you can definitely level the characters up before running it, if you will. And it is definitely one of my most often run adventures. I could probably draw the map like now, but I won't. I'll spare you. It's absolutely has that replayability. Even with new characters, things are going to go differently, or the same players with new characters. But I think it's definitely, it's got that you walk into a movie set kind of feel. Like, are these really lizard folk? No, clearly that's a costume. That's gotta be set dressing. No, they fire hot, fire bad.
But this is one of my all-time favorite adventures. I think as a funnel, it is. And some folks might find this to be blasphemy, but I think this funnel is every bit as fun as Sailors on the Starless Sea. It's just as fun on the far extreme side as Black Sun Death Crawl. It's different from both of them, but it knocks it out of the park. And the thing is, you don't see a lot from Dieter Zimmerman when it comes to published adventures. You certainly see him a lot on the Twitch channel, but when you see something with his name on it, whether it's this adventure, whether it's the Hangman's Garden that was just released, it's going to be very, very good, and it's worth getting and it's worth playing. And if you're past running a funnel at this point, it's worth reading and stealing ideas from. His stuff is not to be missed. This really is. This is a fabulous adventure. And
without giving too many spoilers, I will say that those coins that they found do tie into sailing into the present quite nicely.
Well, and I was going to say, whether traveling by Magic Coin, Wizard Van, or Crimson Portal, right? Interdimensional travel can be a lot of fun at the table, and this. It really is. I don't think that Dieter gets enough credit for the stuff that he has written in the DCC community. I mean, he is one of the authors in the core book, right? And while he'll be the first one to say, well, I didn't write a whole lot, he's got stuff in the core book. He's been there since the beginning. And if you see something with his name on it, pick it up. Well, yeah, he's still hoping for DMC, Dragon Mech Classics. But if you see something with his name on it, pick it up, because if you haven't read his stuff, you are going to be beyond pleasantly surprised. His adventures are awesome. They're fun from beginning to end. There's never a dull moment.
And fun trivia fact, Mark, wasn't Dieter your first DCC game?
I was gonna say that he's my third adventure that I had for DCC.
Really?
I was introduced to DCC back in 2012 by a local friend who liked to try new game systems, and I was immediately like, "What is this? This is you're at the dungeon and you're you're ready to go. That's new, you know. And then I went to Gen Con 2013, and technically my first game was with Michael Curtis. I did an adventure that he did, a little one called Frozen in Time, and I was like, oh, this is great. And then that Saturday night I played in Dieter's game, and I was like, this is super great. Yes. I mean, both of them are just on the spectrum of, I kind of knew what Michael Curtis's, predicates were, obviously barrier and these kind of things like that, but it's so much different than those. But it was like very much like connective to the D&D games that I would play as a kid. But Dieter's was entirely new, entirely like out of left field. And I just had so much fun playing in his adventure. When I started running games as part of the road crew after getting back from that Gen Con that year, one of the things I did was I wrote to Dieter and said, hey, can I run your adventure? And he was like, I haven't written anything down. And so
oh, that's a
curse. I was like, well, tell me what you can. And, so basically I wanted to share that, with the local group that was, doing games for at a game store. And it was a big hit. It's one of those things that, it was the version that was still in Dieter's mind, that he'd been running at conventions for, probably a few years by that point, or a couple of years. But I just had so much fun, with that concept of, this is something I had not thought you could do with role playing, right? And that was sort of my naivety, but it's also my sort of, like, I was so used to the standard, boilerplate template for adventures, and Dieter really reframed that and
turned it on its head
in a way that really made me care about DCC, in a way that very similar to what Michael Curtis made me care about DCC, but in a completely, and other end of the spectrum, as I mentioned. So I love this adventure. It's great. It was one of my, I would say, kind of key influences for DCC. Thinking back to that time and just how much I wanted to carry that, the table. So I really appreciate Dieter, running that for us, but also his giving me some feedback when I was trying to run it, also kind of those early days. It made me really feel connected as a judge to be able to reach out to like somebody who was running this kind of adventure and be able to, get them to say, bless, at least, yeah, I think it'd be great if you ran this. So really like that.
Isn't it kind of mind-blowing, like a decade later?
It is, yeah.
And we also like
my anniversary shirt, my 2013 World Tour shirt, in that moment, recognition of that moment.
Love it.
Well, just this adventure. There's something about this adventure where by the time you're done, you can smell the stale cigarette smoke coming off the jean jacket vest, right? I mean, my high school had a smoking area, and those people come down the hall, and you knew it. And it was sort of that vibe. It really catches me. It's that, where some adventures are inspired by Appendix N. I would say Dieter's adventure is more inspired by like mid to late 70s metal album covers. And
that tracks.
It's great stuff. Again, does not get nearly the recognition he deserves for the stuff that he's written. Hunt this down. You can still get this, I think, at the Goodman store. I'm sure Jen will correct me if I'm wrong, since she's been unpacking boxes.
It's the one that has the dead captain from the Warden on the cover.
Yes.
Side,
Year of Doom on the Warden.
Yeah.
So
it was the 40th anniversary of Metamorphosis Alpha, I believe.
Yes.
Also has a really great interview with Luzaki in there. But I was going to give a one-liner about the adventure. You will travel to a different time or place, and you will encounter, the stereotypical dragon in a dungeon. It won't be anything like what you expect.
Oh, yeah.
and
if you haven't played it, you're
my
in for a
heart just shines every time the players realize what's going on. and their faces just kind of go, oh. And it's beautiful. Okay, we are running a little long. I apologize. We should give Elena a break. So I might zip through this part pretty quick. FYI, relocating the Sanctum Secorum has caused a couple delays in some of our ongoing projects. Sorry, but they shall be returning shortly. They better be. In the meantime, if you are enjoying the show, please comment on the podcast or help us by posting a review on iTunes and now YouTube or Drive-Thru RPG for you zine fans. These ratings and reviews help new listeners find the product and, more importantly, the community. Next month, we'll be looking at a posthumous Lovecraft collaboration by none other. Oh, sorry, collaboration. I'm supposed to.
Collaboration. Derleth.
By August Derleth, Trail of Cthulhu, perfect for October and the spooky season. Any last try words again, Jen. Any last thoughts, folks? It's late and I don't have words anymore.
Well, you can look for Legends of Uganda, the print zine that collects some of Ashraf's work with a few updates and new material. It was released in print for Gen Con, and it will be available, I am told, soon at the Goodman Games Online store.
That's pretty much the party line. Soon.
Soon. Yeah. I'd also just like to take a moment. Recently there was a lot of hubbub in the DCC community because there was a Kickstarter, Champions of the Goblin Marketplace, that originally the author was just trying to do a quick PDF. He didn't really know anything about getting anything printed, so he was just going to do a PDF, and then folks talked to him, and so he was going to do a print PDF. But his intention had always been just to do it all himself. And since he wasn't an artist, he was using AI art. And the community reached out and actually handled it, I think very well, with voicing their concerns about things like that. And that feedback was wholeheartedly embraced. All of the AI art was pulled from the adventure even before, he set up stretch goals to bring in Brad McDevitt, Stephen Pogue, Brett Hess, and even before all those stretch goals had been filled, he had pulled all of the AI art. He's like, this is important to the community. I'm new to the community. That makes this important to me. And the Kickstarter ended today. It hit all of its goals, which really shows how much the community values traditional art. And it is wonderful.
Its own.
Well, it's wonderful that the community was able to rally around someone who was new and enthusiastic rather than tearing them down. They built them up, and it was a fantastic first experience in the community for him. And to me, it's what the DCC community is all about. So I felt that was kind of worth mentioning. What about you, Mark?
I was going to say, I think we mentioned this in our interview with Michael Moorcock. There was recently some new versions of the Elric Chronicles that have been published, complete volumes. I think there's 3 volumes published by Gallery/Saga Press that are lovely, and they have include these great, illustrations on the front cover. Get those. I think the 3rd one was being published shortly after we did our interview with Michael Moorcock. That was, I think, one of the reasons that we were. And there was like a new book that he was also, that was the 4th book I think coming out there. But those are great additions to get to the complete stories, and they're in chronological order, which obviously
very helpful.
Very helpful as well. So just for listeners who want to dive into Elric and haven't had a chance to yet, there's some recent versions of them that are very high quality and like I said, are chronologically ordered, so you can go from the beginning to end as Michael Moorcock intended.
Awesome.
Or keeps intending as he adds.
As he keeps adding, yes.
Well, thank you so much, fellow keepers. And there you have it, folks. We hope we've inspired you. Thanks for listening.
Be inspired.
Good
Good night.
night.